Her husband left her only an abandoned, run-down house in his will, but what she discovered changed everything. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping the room with restless shadows. Stella McCathy sat stiffly in her chair, her handbag clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. She had buried her husband, Thomas, only 3 weeks ago, and the grief still clung to her skin like damp clothes. Yet here she was, summoned to hear his final will, an event that should have brought clarity, but instead made her stomach churn with unease. Across the table, her son Charles leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He was 38 now, broad-shouldered and polished in his expensive navy suit, every inch the image of success. Beside him, Adrienne, his wife, sat with crossed arms and a sharp, appraising gaze that made Stella feel like an intruder at her own husband's farewell. The lawyer, Mr. Bryant, cleared his throat, his eyes betraying a flicker of discomfort as he adjusted his glasses. "This is the last will and testament of Thomas McCathy." He spoke evenly, but Stella noticed the hesitation in his voice, as though he already anticipated what was about to unfold. Her heart hammered as the words poured out. "To my son, Charles McCathy, I leave the Brookside Avenue penthouse and the family's primary investments." Charles's smirk widened into something crueler, almost triumphant. He didn't look at his mother. He looked past her, as though she were invisible. "And to my beloved wife, Stella," Mr. Bryant paused. His throat worked before he forced the words out. "I leave the property located on Willow Creek Road. The inn. Hey, my beautiful story family. Hope you are doing well today. Drop a comment and let me know how you are feeling today and where you are watching from. Let me know how you are feeling about this story so far. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button because the tension is only just starting to build, and trust me, you are going to want to know how this goes." The air in the room seemed to collapse. Stella blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. The inn. That crumbling, forgotten husk on the edge of town? For a moment, she thought perhaps there was some mistake. But Mr. Bryant's solemn face told her otherwise. Charles's laugh shattered the silence. "Are you kidding me?" He leaned forward, eyes flashing with disdain. "You get the old dump, and I get everything else. Fitting, isn't it?" He turned to Adrienne, who smirked back at him as though they were sharing a private joke. Then he leaned toward his mother, his voice cutting like glass. "Guess even Dad knew you were nothing but a useless old woman." The words hit her like a slap. Stella flinched, heat rising in her cheeks as shame wrapped its claws around her. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself, but no sound came. Her throat had closed, strangling the words before they could escape. Mr. Bryant shifted uncomfortably, but Charles dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "Let her have it," Charles sneered. "Maybe she can rot there with the ghosts." The will concluded in a blur. Charles and Adrienne rose quickly, Charles's hand brushing her shoulder in a mock gesture of comfort that was anything but kind. "Don't worry, Mom," he whispered, his tone dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sure you'll find the rats good company." Their laughter trailed behind them as they disappeared into the hallway, leaving Stella trembling in her chair. When the room finally emptied, she sat motionless, her breath shallow and her chest aching. The words echoed in her skull, "Useless old woman." For decades, she had sacrificed, endured, loved, and believed that family was unbreakable. And yet, in one cruel afternoon, she had been cast aside, stripped of dignity, of love, of home. That evening, Charles's cruelty became action. He returned to the penthouse, his voice clipped and final. "Pack your things. You're not staying here." "Charles," she had begun, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. There was no trace of the boy she had raised, no flicker of the child who once clung to her skirts. Only a hard man who saw her as a burden. She packed in silence. The photographs, the heirlooms, the threads of her life, all shoved into a single battered suitcase. As she closed the door behind her, she felt the weight of exile settle on her shoulders. The penthouse was no longer hers. Neither, it seemed, was her son. The taxi driver gave her a strange look when she handed him the address on Willow Creek Road. The ride was long, quiet, and heavy with unspoken judgment. When the car stopped, Stella stepped out into the night air, her breath catching as her eyes rose to meet the shape before her. The inn loomed against the moonlight, a crooked silhouette of sagging beams and shattered windows. The sign that once bore its name dangled on rusted chains, groaning with every breath of wind. The place smelled of damp wood and neglect, a tomb of forgotten years. She stood frozen at the gates, her suitcase heavy in her hand, grief battling with despair. The house Thomas had left her looked less like an inheritance and more like a curse. Yet as she pushed open the warped front door, a breath of cold air rushed past her face, carrying a whisper so faint she thought it might have been her imagination. It sounded almost like a voice, soft, urgent, and waiting. The floorboards groaned under Stella's weight as she stepped deeper into the abandoned inn. The air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint scent of mildew. Her suitcase scraped against the warped wood, its wheels useless on the uneven surface. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. She set the case down and sank onto a rickety chair in what had once been the front parlor. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, catching the weak glow of the moon through a crack in the shutters. The wallpaper had long since faded, curling like parchment. This was her inheritance, a coffin of wood and stone. Her body trembled, not just from the cold but from exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into the soul. She clasped her hands tightly, her mind drifting back to the warmth of a life that now seemed a cruel illusion. Thomas. His name was a whisper in her chest. She could still see his smile on the day they first stepped into their starter apartment, a place barely big enough for a kitchen table and a mattress. They had nothing then but each other and dreams. He'd promised her a future full of love and security, and she had believed him with all her heart. For decades she had stood by him, through failed ventures, through sickness, through late nights when bills outnumbered the meals on the table. And Charles, her sweet boy. She remembered his small hand wrapped around hers as they crossed busy streets, his laughter echoing down hallways. She had stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays, baking cakes for birthdays they could hardly afford, holding him through fevers when his little body shook with chills. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, she had worn like a badge of honor. She had been proud to be his mother. But somewhere something shifted. The boy who once ran into her arms grew into a man who recoiled from her touch. Charles had always been ambitious, but ambition had turned to hunger. A hunger for wealth, for power, for prestige. Somewhere along the line, she had lost him to the glittering world he so desperately wanted to belong to. Adrienne hadn't helped. Sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued Adrienne, who looked at Stella as though she were an outdated piece of furniture cluttering the penthouse. Stella had tried to ignore the cutting remarks, tried to smile through the dinners where she was treated like an inconvenience. But deep down, she knew Adrienne had sunk her claws into Charles's heart, whispering poison until he believed it himself, that his mother was nothing but a burden. Now, sitting in the ruins of the inn, Stella asked herself if Thomas had seen it too. Was this why he left her this place? A shield disguised as a ruin? A test, perhaps, or a gift she was too blinded by grief to understand. She rose and wandered through the dining hall. A once grand chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by grime, swaying slightly in the draught. She ran her hand along a long table covered in dust. If she closed her eyes, she could almost hear it as it once must have been. Laughter, music, glasses clinking, Thomas's arm wrapped protectively around her waist. The image flickered and died. She opened her eyes to the hollow echo of her own footsteps. Her stomach growled, snapping her back to reality. She rummaged through her handbag and pulled out an apple and a crust of bread she had packed in haste. As she ate, Charles's words replayed in her mind like a cruel refrain. Useless old woman. She had thought grief was the sharpest pain, but betrayal, it cut deeper. Tears welled, blurring the edges of the crumbling room around her. She pressed her hand against the peeling wallpaper as if it could steady her, as if the house itself might hold her up. "Why, Thomas?" she whispered into the silence. "Why this place? What did you want me to find here?" The house groaned in reply, its timbers shifting as though acknowledging her plea. For the first time since the will had been read, something other than despair stirred inside her, a spark of defiance. Perhaps Charles believed she was finished, a relic to be discarded. But maybe Thomas had seen something different. Maybe he had left her this ruin not to humiliate her, but to remind her of her strength. Stella wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve. She was not ready to give up, not yet. If Thomas had left her a secret in this place, she would find it. And if Charles thought she was useless, she would prove him wrong. As the wind howled outside, Stella gathered her coat tighter around her shoulders and prepared to explore deeper into the house. The old boards beneath her feet creaked again, louder this time, hollow, as if the inn itself was trying to tell her something hidden waited just beneath the surface. The storm came suddenly, sweeping across the valley with howling winds and rain that battered the broken shutters. The inn moaned with every gust, its old timbers creaking as though protesting the intrusion. Stella moved through the shadowed hallway with a candle in hand, its flickering light chasing back the darkness only by inches. Her foot pressed against the loose floorboard again. This time she stopped. The hollow thud beneath it seemed louder now, more deliberate, like a whisper calling for her attention. Slowly, she set the candle on a nearby shelf, then knelt on the splintered floor. Her hands trembled as she pried at the warped board. At first it resisted, then crack, it gave way, the sound swallowed by the roar of the storm outside. Beneath, hidden in the dust of decades, lay a small wooden box wrapped in a fraying cloth. Stella's breath caught. She lifted it out carefully, brushing away cobwebs and dirt. The box was heavier than it looked, its brass latch tarnished with age. On the lid, faintly carved into the wood, were the initials TM. Her heart lurched. Thomas. Her husband's mark. With shaking fingers, she opened the box. Inside lay a stack of letters bound by twine and a leather-bound ledger, its pages swollen slightly from age. She lifted the first letter, recognizing at once the handwriting. Firm, deliberate, unmistakably his. My dearest Stella, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone. I left you this inn not to burden you, but to protect you. Within these walls lie things I could not risk leaving in plain sight. They are for you, and you alone, to decide how to use. Trust your strength, my love. You have always had more than you realize. Stella pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes blurring with tears. Thomas. Even in death, his words reached her. For a moment, the loneliness eased. She turned to the ledger next. Flipping it open, she found neat rows of entries, dates, names, amounts of money. Large sums she could scarcely comprehend. They weren't household accounts. These were transactions, investments, secret holdings she had never known existed. The deeper she read, the faster her pulse raced. Page after page, it became clear. Thomas had been building something quietly, deliberately. He had hidden wealth here, wealth her son knew nothing about. At the very back of the ledger, tucked between the pages, was a rough sketch of the inn itself. Stella held it up to the candlelight, her breath quickening. The drawing showed markings across the walls and floors, symbols pointing to hidden compartments. She whispered into the shadows, "What were you planning, Thomas? What did you want me to find?" Her candle flickered wildly, throwing monstrous shapes against the walls. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the glass in the windows. Stella gasped and clutched the box tighter. For the first time, she understood. This house was no ruin. It was a vault, a keeper of secrets. But why had Thomas kept it from her? Why entrust it to her only after death? Her thoughts spun in a storm of fear and curiosity. The betrayal of Charles, the cruelty of his words, burned in her chest, but alongside it grew something else, a rising fire of determination. If this inn held the truth, she would uncover it. And if Charles thought she was a useless old woman, he would learn just how wrong he was. As she closed the box and hugged it against her chest, Stella caught a faint outline on the wall behind her, a panel slightly uneven, just visible in the candle's glow. The air seemed to shift around her, as if the house itself was urging her forward, deeper into its secrets. The storm finally eased by morning, leaving the air damp and heavy. Pale light crept through the cracks in the shutters, illuminating the dust that hung in the air like smoke. Stella had barely slept, the weight of Thomas's letter and the ledger pressing against her heart. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his handwriting, his quiet plea for her to trust her own strength. The inn felt different now. Less like a ruin, more like a puzzle. Stella carried the box with her as she moved from room to room, comparing Thomas's crude sketch to the walls around her. Each mark on the paper seemed to correspond to something in the house. A hollow space behind the stairs, a seam in the paneling near the dining hall, a section of wall in the parlor where the boards didn't quite align. Her pulse quickened. What else had he hidden? In the dining hall, she found the first marked spot. The wallpaper there was peeling worse than in other places, curling outward as though trying to reveal something beneath. Stella pressed her hand against it. The panel behind gave slightly, softer than it should have. She fetched a fire poker from the hearth and wedged it into the seam. With a grunt, she pried it open. The board cracked free, splinters flying. Inside was a narrow compartment. She reached in and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. Inside were more papers, deeds, contracts, bank slips. Her eyes widened as she scanned them. These weren't scraps. They were assets, land holdings, stocks, documents of value far greater than anything she had ever touched. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the sound might echo through the empty halls. Thomas had hidden a fortune here. Quietly, deliberately, as though preparing for something or protecting her from someone. She sank onto a dust-covered chair, clutching the bundle. The words from Charles returned to her, cruel and sharp, useless old woman. She almost laughed, the sound broken and bitter. If only he knew. If only he understood that the ruin he mocked was worth more than all his penthouses and polished suits. But fear crept in quickly after. If Charles discovered this, if Adrienne caught wind, what would they do? The thought of her son's hungry eyes made her shiver. He wouldn't see this as hers. He would see it as his by right. And Adrienne, she would encourage him, sharpen his greed until it cut even deeper. A loud crash startled her. Stella froze. Somewhere above her, on the second floor, something had fallen. The air grew heavy again, thick with dread. Slowly, she set down the bundle and picked up the fire poker, her only weapon. The stairs loomed before her, groaning under her cautious steps. At the top, the hallway stretched into shadow. Doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, wallpaper slashed by time. She inched forward, her candlelight trembling. Then she saw it. One of the bedroom doors swaying gently as though it had been pushed. "Hello!" Her voice cracked in the silence. Only the echo answered. She stepped inside. The room was empty except for an overturned chair near the window, rocking slightly as though disturbed. Stella's chest tightened. She could have sworn the air still vibrated with movement, as though someone or something had just been there. Her grip on the poker tightened. Fear clawed at her throat, but another voice whispered inside her. "Thomas trusted you. Find the truth." Her candlelight flickered across the far wall, and her breath caught. Another faint marking, just like the one downstairs. Thomas had hidden something here, too. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the edge of the panel. Then a gust of wind burst through the broken window, extinguishing her candle. Darkness swallowed her whole, and in the suffocating black, Stella thought she heard it, footsteps echoing softly down the hallway behind her. Darkness pressed against Stella like a weight. She clutched the poker in both hands, her breath shallow. The footsteps, or the memory of them, still echoed in her ears. She strained to listen, every muscle rigid. The storm outside had quieted to a drizzle, but inside the inn the silence roared. Her fingers fumbled for the matches she'd tucked into her coat pocket. The first two snapped uselessly, breaking under her trembling grip. Finally, the third caught, flaring bright enough to sting her eyes. She lit her candle again, its faint circle of light trembling with her hands. The wall marking was still there, etched faintly where Thomas's sketch had shown. Stella lowered the poker and pressed her free hand against the panel. It gave slightly, then clicked. She froze, pulse racing. With a soft push, the wooden board slid aside, revealing a narrow cavity beyond. Stella raised the candle and gasped. Behind the wall lay a small hidden room, untouched by time. Dust motes floated like ghosts in the air, but everything inside was arranged with care. There was a writing desk, old but sturdy, covered in neatly stacked folders. A locked metal box rested beneath it, its surface rusted but intact. On the far wall hung a photograph of her and Thomas, smiling in front of the inn on the day they'd first visited it together, decades ago. Her throat tightened. She hadn't even known that picture still existed. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the worn rug beneath her shoes. On the desk lay another envelope, her name written across it in Thomas's hand. Her vision blurred as she tore it open. "My Stella," the letter began. "If you have found this room, then you are stronger than you realize. Everything I built, the accounts, the deeds, the shares, they are here for you. I could not trust Charles with them. He has changed, and I feared he would destroy what I worked so hard to preserve. But you will know what to do. Use them wisely. They are your shield, your freedom, your chance to begin again." Her tears dripped onto the page. For the first time since his death, she didn't feel abandoned. Thomas had seen her pain before it happened. He had planned for her survival. Hands trembling, she reached for the folders. Inside were bank documents and property deeds she had never heard of, accounts spread across different names, parcels of land in other towns, investments Thomas had hidden carefully. One figure made her gasp aloud. The sum written there was more than she could fathom, more than anything Charles had ever dreamed of inheriting. Her husband had left her not ruin, but riches disguised as decay. She moved to the locked box beneath the desk. Its keyhole was old, rusted, but when she pulled open the drawer above, she found a small brass key waiting. She slipped it in, turned it, and the box creaked open. Inside were velvet pouches, heavy with coins and jewelry, and a stack of old journals bound in leather. Stella touched them with reverence. The jewelry glinted in the candlelight, but it was the journals that drew her hand. She flipped one open, scanning Thomas's neat handwriting. These weren't diaries, they were records. Names, places, coded notes. Her stomach tightened as she realized these weren't just financial records. They hinted at secrets Thomas had kept from everyone, even her, deals, perhaps, or alliances she didn't yet understand. The floorboard creaked behind her. Stella snapped her head up, the candlelight quivering wildly across the hidden room. The doorway was empty, but for the first time, she couldn't tell if she was truly alone. Clutching the journals to her chest, Stella whispered her husband's name. Somewhere in the hollow silence of the inn, a board groaned in reply, as if Thomas's secrets weren't finished with her yet. The candlelight wavered, its glow bending across the cracked wallpaper of the hidden room. Stella set the journals down carefully on the desk, her fingers tracing the worn leather covers. They smelled faintly of smoke and cedar, as though Thomas had tucked pieces of his life into them and sealed them away for her to find. She opened the first one. The handwriting was sharp, methodical. It began with financial notes she didn't fully understand. Transactions, investment accounts, shifting sums that made her head spin. But deeper in the pages, the tone changed. There were names she recognized, local officials, bankers, even people from their church. Thomas had written about them with chilling precision. Who could be trusted, who was greedy, who might betray their word. Stella's throat tightened. Her husband hadn't just been saving money. He had been mapping people, documenting their weaknesses, their ambitions. It was like looking into a web Thomas had spun, one thread leading to another until it formed a net strong enough to hold secrets bigger than she had ever imagined. The second journal was even stranger. It contained sketches of the inn, just like the one she had found in the ledger, but far more detailed. Passages, compartments, hidden spaces she never knew existed. Notes in the margins read, "Keep this sealed. Too dangerous. Don't let Charles find it." Her heart pounded at the sight of her son's name. Thomas had known. He had anticipated Charles's hunger, his cruelty. Stella sat back, her hand covering her mouth. For years she had made excuses for Charles's behavior, telling herself he was just stressed, just busy, just ambitious. But Thomas had seen through the illusions. He had left her not only protection but proof. Evidence of the danger Charles posed if he ever gained control. The third journal was thinner, more fragile. Its pages shook as she turned them. Unlike the others, this one read like letters addressed to her. Notes of love, reminders of memories, and fragments of advice. Trust yourself. Do not give in to despair. You are stronger than you know. Each line made her chest ache. She could almost hear Thomas's voice in the room with her, urging her onward. Her hands trembled as she closed the book. The enormity of it all pressed down on her. She had walked into this in broken, discarded, and ready to fade into obscurity. But Thomas had prepared her for something else entirely. He had left her the pieces of a kingdom hidden inside a ruin. Still, fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. If she could find these journals, so could Charles. And once he learned what was here, he would come for her, she had no doubt. A sudden noise snapped her head up. This time it wasn't the house groaning or the wind howling. It was sharp, deliberate, the the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Stella's chest clenched. Her grip tightened on the poker. She blew out the candle, plunging herself into darkness, and listened. The inn was no longer silent. Someone else was inside. In the pitch black, Stella pressed her back against the wall of the hidden room, the journals heavy in her arms. A man's footsteps echoed below, steady and unhurried, as if he already knew she was there. Stella's breath came shallow, each inhale a scrape against her ribs as she stood in the dark. The footsteps below were slow, measured, deliberate. Not the skitter of rodents or the groan of timber, but the cadence of a man who knew where he was going. Her grip tightened on the fire poker. The journals weighed heavily in her other arm. She wanted to run, to bolt from the house, but her legs felt like they had rooted themselves into the floorboards. Then a voice floated up from the hall below. Low. Familiar. Mother. Stella's blood ran cold. Charles. For a heartbeat she thought she had imagined it, some cruel trick of her mind. But the next moment his voice echoed again, sharper this time. Mother. I know you're here. The journals nearly slipped from her grasp. She stumbled backward into the hidden room, her pulse hammering in her ears. How had he found her? Had he followed her from the city? Or had someone told him about the inn? Her throat tightened. She couldn't let him see what she had uncovered, not yet. She shoved the journals back into the metal box and slid it beneath the desk, her movements frantic but silent. The poker remained clutched in her hand, her only weapon against her own son. Charles's footsteps grew louder as he climbed the stairs. Each creak of the wood was a countdown. Stella pressed herself against the wall of the hidden room, barely daring to breathe. Why didn't you just tell me? Charles's voice was closer now, filled with anger, but beneath it, something else, a tremor, a desperation. Why did Dad give this place to you? What did he hide here? He stopped just outside the bedroom door. Stella's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then came the sound of the door groaning open. His shadow spilled across the floor. He stepped inside, his tall frame blotting out the pale light from the hall. Stella bit her lip to keep from crying out. From where she stood hidden behind the panel, she could see him. He looked different, hollow-eyed, restless, as though the penthouse and wealth he had grasped so tightly were already slipping from his hands. Dad wouldn't do this to me, he muttered, pacing the room. Not unless. His eyes darted toward the wall. For a moment Stella froze, certain he had seen the seam of the hidden panel. But his gaze slid past it, settling on the broken chair by the window. She exhaled silently, her body trembling. She had to think, had to act before he drew closer. Then Charles turned, his voice rising. Mother, come out. You don't belong here. The words struck her harder than the storm ever had. The child she had once rocked to sleep, the boy she had sewn costumes for, now stood before her like a stranger demanding her erasure. And yet, something in her chest hardened. She was not the useless old woman he had mocked. Not anymore. Stella tightened her grip on the poker. If Charles found the hidden room, if he uncovered what Thomas had left for her, everything would unravel. She had to protect it, even if it meant standing against her own son. Her heart hammered as his footsteps drew nearer. The panel between them was all that remained, thin with separating mother from son, protector from predator. And then, with a sudden sharp knock, Charles's hand struck the very wall behind which she stood. The sound reverberated through the hidden chamber, and Stella bit back a gasp. If Charles pushed just a little harder, he would discover everything, and she wasn't ready for him to know. The knock against the panel rattled through Stella's bones. Her breath hitched, and she pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. On the other side of the wall, Charles's voice dropped lower, colder. I know you're here. I can feel it. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, but the pressure was unbearable. The boy she had once held in her arms was now hunting her in her own inheritance. And for what? Greed. Entitlement. The illusion that everything his father had built belonged to him. Charles struck the wall again, harder this time. Dust rained from the paneling. What did he leave you? Tell me. His voice cracked under the weight of rage and desperation. Stella could no longer hide. She pushed the panel open, the creak slicing through the silence. Charles's head snapped toward her. For a moment time froze, his eyes widening at the sight of her stepping out of the darkness, fire poker in hand, her face pale but resolute. "Mother," he breathed, his expression twisting between shock and fury. "So it's true. You found something." Stella raised her chin, her voice unsteady but firm. "Your father trusted me, Charles. Not you." The words landed like a blow. Charles's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. "Trusted you," he spat. "He should have trusted me. I'm his son. I'm the one who deserves it, not—" He stopped himself, his glare searing into her. "Not you." Stella's grip on the poker tightened, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "All your life, I gave you everything. Every ounce of myself went into raising you, protecting you. But your father saw what I refused to see. You lost your way, Charles. And if I hand this over to you, it will destroy you." Charles stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. His eyes darted toward the hidden room behind her, greedy, searching. "What did you find? Money? Land? Tell me, Mother." She blocked the entrance with her body. "It's not yours." His nostrils flared. "It's mine by blood. You think you can keep it from me? You're nothing without me." "Nothing." The venom in his words sliced deep, but Stella did not flinch. For the first time, she stood her ground. Her heart pounded as she raised the poker slightly, her eyes locked on his. "You may be my son," she whispered, "but I will not let you take what Thomas entrusted to me. Not this time." For a heartbeat, Charles faltered, his face contorting with disbelief. Then rage consumed him. He lunged forward, his hand grabbing for the box beneath the desk. Stella swung the poker instinctively. The iron connected with the edge of the table, sending a thunderous clang through the room. Charles stumbled back, startled. The sound seemed to wake something in the house itself. The walls groaned, and the floor beneath them shuddered. Charles froze, his eyes wide as a section of plaster cracked in the corner. Something hidden, something Thomas had buried deeper still, shifted in the shadows. Both mother and son turned toward the sound. For a moment, their rage was eclipsed by awe. Another secret was waiting to be unearthed. The inn groaned again, louder this time, as if it were alive. Stella's grip tightened on the poker. Charles's gaze flicked back to her, his greed reignited. Whatever lay beneath those walls, both of them now knew, it was worth fighting for. The sound of crumbling plaster echoed like thunder as dust filled the hidden chamber. Stella coughed, shielding her eyes while Charles staggered back, his suit smeared with grime. The wall at the far end split open, revealing a dark hollow space beyond. The inn had given up another secret. Charles's eyes gleamed with feverish hunger. "There! That's it! That's what he left us." He lunged forward, but Stella blocked his path, her arms outstretched. "Stop, Charles." Her voice wavered, but her stance did not. "You don't even know what's inside." "I don't care," he shouted, shoving past her. "If Father hid it, it's valuable. And if it's valuable, it belongs to me." He scrambled into the hollow, his hands clawing at the debris. Stella followed more slowly, fear prickling her skin. The space was narrow, lined with stone, almost like a vault carved into the house itself. At its center lay a chest, iron-bound, its lock rusted but unbroken. Charles dropped to his knees, tugging at it with frantic strength. "Help me open it," he demanded. But Stella stood back, her chest tight. Something about the chest unnerved her. Thomas's journals had warned her. Too dangerous. Do not let Charles find it. Her husband had trusted her to protect this secret, not to unleash it. "Charles, listen to me." Her voice was firm now, the edge of a mother who once soothed fevers and scolded tantrums. "Not everything your father left was meant to be claimed. Some of it was meant to be guarded." He turned, his face twisted with rage. "Guarded? Or kept from me?" His hands shook as he pounded against the lock. "You've always wanted to control me." "Well, not this time." The lock snapped with a sharp crack, the old metal finally giving way. Charles threw open the lid and froze. Inside was no treasure of gold or jewels. Instead, stacks of documents lay carefully arranged, each stamped with official seals. Stella stepped closer, her breath catching as she read the first page. It was a deed, signed not in their family's name, but in the names of people she didn't recognize. Beneath it were ledgers of hidden accounts, maps of land holdings, and letters implicating men in positions of power. Stella's eyes widened. This wasn't just wealth. It was leverage. Evidence of corruption, debts owed, power brokered in secret. Thomas hadn't simply built a fortune. He had built a shield of influence. Charles's hands shook as he flipped through the papers, his expression flickering between awe and greed. This is worth more than money. With this, we could control everything. Stella pulled the papers from his grasp, clutching them to her chest. No, Charles. With this, we could destroy everything. Their eyes locked, mother and son on opposite sides of a legacy that could either protect or consume them. Charles's breathing grew ragged, his desperation raw. Give it to me, he hissed. No, Stella's voice was steady now, steel beneath the grief. Your father trusted me because he knew power in your hands would turn to poison. I won't let you ruin his name, or yourself. For a moment, Charles faltered. His chest rose and fell as though he were drowning. Then his face hardened again, the boy she had loved buried beneath the man consumed by greed. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Then you leave me no choice. Stella's heart pounded as Charles advanced, his hand reaching not for her, but for the documents pressed against her chest. For the first time, she realized this battle was no longer just about inheritance. It was about survival. The room pulsed with tension, the air thick with dust and the weight of everything unsaid. Stella clutched the stack of documents against her chest, her arms aching, but she refused to let go. Across from her, Charles's face was contorted with rage, his eyes fixed on the papers as if they were the only thing left keeping him alive. Mother, he said, his voice low, trembling with barely controlled fury. Give them to me. Right now. She shook her head slowly, her chin lifting. No, Charles. I can't. I won't. His jaw tightened. You think you can stand in my way? After everything I've done for this family. The words stung like acid. Stella's lips parted, a bitter laugh escaping before she could stop it. Everything you've done? You abandoned me the moment your father died. You threw me out like garbage. And now you want to pretend you're entitled to this. Her words landed, and for a split second, Charles's eyes flickered. Not with remorse, but with shame he quickly buried under anger. He stepped forward, his voice a growl. I deserve it. I earned it. And if you won't hand it over, I'll take it from you. He lunged. Stella stumbled back, clutching the documents tighter, her back hitting the desk. The journals tumbled to the floor, scattering across the rug. Charles reached for the papers, his fingers grazing them, but Stella swung the fire poker with all her strength. The iron struck his arm, and he cried out, stumbling sideways. The crash echoed through the hollow chamber, shaking loose more dust from the rafters. Stella's chest heaved as she raised the poker again, her hands trembling. She had never struck her son before, never even imagined it, but now she stood between him and destruction. Stop this, Charles, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Look at yourself. This isn't who you are. This isn't the boy I raised. But Charles's eyes were wild, his chest heaving. He clutched his bruised arm and spat. That boy is gone. You made sure of it when you kept this from me. He lunged again, grabbing her wrist this time. The poker clattered to the ground as his strength overpowered her. They struggled, the documents tearing slightly under the force of their tug-of-war. Stella cried out, her body straining against him. Then, with a roar of frustration, Charles shoved her back. She stumbled, colliding with the edge of the desk. Pain shot through her spine, but she refused to let go of the papers. Her fingers clung to them like lifelines. Why, Mother? Charles shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of something deeper than anger. Why did he give this to you and not me? Stella's vision blurred with tears. Because he knew the truth. He knew power would destroy you, Charles. And it already has. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Charles's face twisted, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. For the first time, he looked less like a man and more like a lost child, furious, desperate, broken. But then his eyes dropped back to the chest, to the wealth and power spilling from its seams. The boy was gone again, consumed by greed. He lunged once more, his hand closing over hers, the documents caught between them. The paper tore, a jagged rip echoing through the silence. Both mother and son froze, staring at the torn fragments fluttering to the ground. In that moment, Stella realized something chilling. If she didn't end this fight now, it would consume them both. The torn pieces of Thomas's legacy drifted across the floor like fallen leaves. Stella's chest tightened. She had one choice left, protect her husband's secrets at all costs, even if it meant losing Charles forever. The torn papers lay scattered across the rug like fallen feathers, some stamped with seals, others smeared with dust and blood from Charles's scraped knuckles. He stood over them, chest heaving, his face pale with fury and desperation. Stella remained pressed against the desk, her arms aching from the struggle, her breath shallow but steady. The silence stretched, broken only by Charles's ragged breathing. His eyes darted from the papers to her, a storm raging in them. For a fleeting moment, Stella saw the boy he once was. The boy who used to cling to her hand in crowded streets, the boy who once whispered, "Don't let go, Mama." Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Charles, please. Stop this before it destroys you." But the flicker of her son vanished as quickly as it came. His jaw hardened, and his voice sharpened into a blade. "It's already mine. All of it. I won't let you take it from me." He dropped to his knees, snatching up the torn documents with frantic hands, piecing them together like a child desperate to rebuild a broken toy. His movements were wild, clumsy, his breathing harsh. Stella's heart broke at the sight. This wasn't ambition anymore. This was madness. She knelt too, but not for the papers. Her trembling hand reached for his arm. "Charles," she said softly, "I never wanted to take anything from you. I only wanted to protect you, from yourself." His arm jerked away as if her touch burned him. His eyes glistened, not with remorse, but with rage. "Protect me? You've ruined me," he spat, clutching the fragments to his chest like they could save him. "You've always looked down on me, always judged me. Well, now you see. I'm stronger than you ever thought." Stella shook her head, her tears spilling freely. "No, Charles. Strength isn't in what you take. It's in what you give." The words hung in the air. Charles froze, his lips parting, but no sound came. His gaze faltered, slipping for just an instant, before snapping back to the papers. He shoved past her, scrambling to stuff them into his jacket. "Get out of my way," he growled. But Stella didn't move. She rose to her feet, her frame trembling but unyielding, and stood in front of the hidden room's exit. Her body was small compared to his, fragile in many ways, but in that moment, she was immovable. "Father trusted me," she said firmly, her voice echoing in the hollow chamber. "And I will not betray him. Not for you. Not for anyone." Charles's face contorted, torn between rage and disbelief. "Then you leave me no choice," he hissed, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. The air thickened. Mother and son stared at one another, the weight of years of love and betrayal pressing down like stone. Then, without warning, Charles shoved forward, his shoulders slamming into her. Stella stumbled, her back hitting the wall hard, pain shooting through her ribs. But even as she fell, her hand clutched one last folder she had managed to snatch from him. She held it close, curling around it protectively. Charles towered above her, his shadow long in the flickering candlelight. For a moment, his face twisted with something almost human. Fear, sorrow, regret, but then it hardened again. He raised his hand, and Stella braced herself. Charles's hand trembled in the air between them, caught on the edge of violence. Stella shut her eyes, unsure if the next moment would bring her son's final betrayal, or his first step toward redemption. Charles's hand hovered in the air, trembling with fury and something else, hesitation. Stella kept her eyes shut, her breath shallow, clutching the folder tight against her chest. She waited for the blow that might finally break her. But it never came. When she opened her eyes, Charles stood frozen, his arms still raised but shaking violently. His chest heaved, his face twisted in conflict. For the first time, Stella saw the war raging inside him. Not just greed, but pain, loneliness, and the hollow echo of a boy who had lost his way. "Charles," her voice cracked, but she pushed on, her words steady. "You don't have to be this man. You can choose to be better. Your father wanted more for you. I want more for you." His jaw clenched, his gaze flickering between her and the torn documents spilling from his jacket. "It's too late," he rasped. "It's all I have left." Stella shook her head, her tears streaking down her cheeks. "No, you still have me. You'll always have me." For a heartbeat, silence wrapped around them, the inn holding its breath. Charles's hand faltered, then dropped limply to his side. He stumbled back, his eyes glistening, his voice a whisper. "I don't know who I am without this." "You're my son," Stella said firmly, rising to her feet despite the pain in her ribs. She placed her hand gently against his cheek. "That's who you are. And that's enough." Charles's face crumpled, the hardness breaking at last. He sank to his knees, the torn papers spilling from his grasp, fluttering to the ground like ashes. His shoulders shook, and for the first time in years, Stella held her son as he wept. The inn around them seemed to sigh, its groans softening, the weight of its secrets finally shared. Stella knew the battle was not over. The documents, the journals, the fortune Thomas had hidden would still draw danger if exposed. But in that moment, none of it mattered more than the boy in her arms. Days later, Stella stood in the doorway of the inn, the morning sun breaking through the clouds. The walls were still cracked, the beams still sagging, but to her eyes, it no longer looked like ruin. It looked like a beginning. She had begun sorting through Thomas's legacy, carefully locking away the most dangerous papers, preserving what was valuable but not destructive. Charles, though broken and humbled, had agreed to leave the inn in her care. He no longer demanded, no longer shouted. He carried himself like a man who had glimpsed the abyss and stepped back from its edge. Together, they boarded up the worst of the damage and cleared dust from the halls. It was not reconciliation overnight, but it was something fragile, something new. As Stella watched her son hammer nails into a loose shutter, she felt a quiet pride stir in her chest. For years, she had believed her worth was gone, her life reduced to the role of a discarded widow. But Thomas's gift had reminded her of the truth. Strength did not fade with age, nor love with betrayal. It endured, it fought, it reclaimed. She turned to the inn, sunlight warming her face. This house, once a tomb of forgotten memories, was now her sanctuary. And though the secrets it held would always whisper through its walls, Stella had made peace with them. They were no longer chains. They were her shield. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered into the morning air, "for trusting me." The breeze rustled through the broken eaves, almost like a reply. Stella smiled through her tears. She was not useless. She was not alone. She had endured. And she had won. My beautiful friends, this story reminds us that strength can be found even in the ruins of our lives, and that legacy is not about wealth, but about love, endurance, and redemption. What part of Stella's journey spoke to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to click subscribe for more stories like this one. Thank you for watching.